All right. Good morning, everybody. Here I am in inland Canaan, which would be Lebanon. Um, it could be a part of Lebanon or Syria, um, but I'm in Lebanon because Syria is just too dangerous right now for me to go into. And I better hurry up and read this before someone starts walking down this corridor. I was out here touring this kind of temple complex, and I thought this was very similar to a part in the chapter uh, where Uriah goes. So I'm gonna start there, and it would be too dark to do this in the dungeons where he is right now. So let's see what happens. This is chapter 16. The priest of Moloch. Now remember, probably doesn't want to meet the priest of Moloch because the priest of Moloch is going to be very upset with him for stealing the sacrifice Jabin, the sacrificial Jabin, from Moloch and Tyre. Okay, so this is chapter 16. You remember last time he was in the dungeon and very scared, and he told the guard who he was and who his father was, Arnadash, and that his father should go to the chief of the city, which is Sisera, and tell him that Uriah Tarhun, son of Arnadash, is in prison there. And we don't know what will happen, but here we go. The priest of Moloch, chapter 16. I cannot say how long they kept me in the prison, except that it was long enough for me to get used to the rats. They fed me enough and gave me enough water, but no one spoke to me. Sometimes, just for the sound of it, I talked aloud to myself and even laughed aloud at the clever things I said. Then, when I stopped, all would be more silent than ever, except for the dank drip of water down a rock somewhere. Then terror would come upon me, and I would mumble frightened prayers to mighty Teshub, and even to Moloch. At last, for the first time, the keeper spoke to me. Come, he said. That was all, and I followed him with shaking knees, my chains dragging behind me. Some soldiers met us and took me from the keeper. They marched me through an underground way that twisted and turned, and finally up some dark, narrow stone steps. Then so suddenly that I rubbed my eyes into the light. We were in a long chamber, smelling of cedar, a type of wood, cedar wood from the northern forests. Through a window I could see outside a high pillar in honor of Shan, the sacred serpent, and nearby was a stone image of Astarte, the mother, with a dove at her breast and the serpent himself at her feet. I knew then where I was, in the chamber attached to the temple of the city god, where the town's council of elders held their meetings. There were benches at either side of the wall on which sat the elders in heavy robes of Babylonian style and with curling heavy netted beards. In the center was a higher bench. Two men sat upon it with another man, probably a temple scribe, squatting at their feet, holding a reed pen and papyrus. Papyrus is the paper that they use, just like the Egyptians. I stared at the two men. I could guess who they were. One was thin and anxious looking, with quick bright eyes and a stringy beard, who reminded me a little of Ethbal. I suppose that he was the chief elder. The other man frightened me. He sat quietly on the high bench, unlike the elder who was always turning his head, gesturing here and there and whispering to the scribe. He had a heavy jaw and a thin mouth. His eyes were small and close set, and when he looked at me, it was like an icy wind going through me. He was clean shaven and dressed like a priest, and I knew with a sick feeling in my stomach that he was the high priest of Moloch in Harosheth. The guard stood me before the high bench, then moved aside. The temple scribe began to read from his tablet. A great crime has been committed against our Lord of wrath, and through him against all the land of Canaan. This year, in our sister city of Tyre, according to ancient custom, a sacrificial offering was dedicated to the Lord Moloch of dreaded name, to appease his wrath. On the eve of the day of the first fruits, the offering was stolen, bringing down the wrath of the gods and all manner of evil upon the land of Canaan. If this prisoner has conspired in this crime, he is worthy of the punishment for blasphemy, which is this: to be taken to the place of execution by the gates of the city and set upon with stones until he is dead. By our laws, 2 witnesses who will not deny each other must be brought forth. I ask leave of the Lord Elder to call them. The elder gave his permission, and the first witness was called. He was one of the servants of Heber the Kenite. He is not a witness, I thought. He was never even in Tyre. He could not have seen what happened, but it did not seem to matter too much. An insect was buzzing about the chamber, and I was watching it, shutting out of my mind what was going on around me, and taking a dreamy pleasure in the sunlight outside. He should pay attention, you'll see. He needs to be paying attention, but he's not, because he thinks they're just going to find him guilty no matter what. Then I heard my name. I jumped. It was the priest of Moloch who had spoken. "What have you to say," he asked me, "of what these honest men have told us? Have they spoken the truth?" "Part of it," I said at last, feeling too confused and tired to explain how much of it was true and how much was not. "Then you admit your guilt, my son?" he asked in a calm, kindly voice. But I knew that he was determined that nothing should cheat his God and his city of their victim, and that there was no hope for me after all. The chief elder leaned toward him and began to whisper in his ear. Perhaps it was because I realized that nothing could save me, or it may have been a fresh breeze that happened to blow through the window and pass across my face. But suddenly I was no longer drowsy, and my thoughts began to clear. I watched the 2 men closely and began to pay careful attention. At last the chief elder turned back to me, smiling for the first time. "My son," he said, "you must look upon us as your friends. It is painful to us to see one so young accused of such a crime, and to be forced to judge you so harshly. Remember that we are servants of gods whom you worshipped in your own country. It is your duty to put your trust in us as you would in your Father, and tell us truthfully all we ask." I looked at him and said nothing. "Is it your desire," said the elder, "to redeem yourself in the eyes of Moloch, whom you have so gravely offended?" "Yes, my lord," I replied. "It was never my wish to offend the gods." "Then listen," said the elder. "We know that you took the sacred child to the Hebrews, and that you have been among them since then. We have heard rumors that the Hebrews are conspiring among themselves and are raising rebellion against us. Do you know of these things?" "Yes, my lord." "Then," said the elder, "give thanks to Moloch, for he has shown you the way to cleanse yourself of your great blasphemy. Think back to what you heard of these things in the tents of the Hebrews. Cleanse your heart of them and tell us what you know." I stood staring at the 2 men on the high bench and thought of the dirty black image of Moloch as I had seen it in the temple at Tyre. I thought of the tents of the Hebrews and Deborah, and Tamar's hand on Jabin's shoulder, and little Aphiah listening to the Red Sea song. A feeling that I could not understand came sweeping over me like wind across the grasslands at home, and I wanted, for some reason, to laugh out loud. Answer the questions we will put to you now, said the high priest. His voice was harsh now, not soft and coaxing like the elders. His eyes told me that redeeming myself in the eyes of Malak did not mean saving myself from death under the stones. Tell us their numbers, he said. Tell us their tribes. Tell us their plans. No, I said. I said it as my father had said it before, to the captain of the sea people. There was silence for a moment. Then the high priest leaned toward me. His voice was soft and shaking with wrath. Then you are guilty of treason as well as blasphemy? Treason to what? I asked, looking at him scornfully. And with all the pride I can muster, I added, I am a Hittite. When I said that, there was a buzz of anger over the chamber, and an old hatred blazed into the eyes of all the counselors on their benches. I believe the elder would have liked to save me before, but not now, for there would always be hatred in the hearts of all ancient peoples for all their conquerors over the years. The high priest of Malak rose to his feet, his heavy face pale. You are insolent, he cried. Besides being a traitor and a blasphemer, do you know what happens to men who will not give honest answers? We test them. We test them in the ordeal by water. For a moment, my head reeled. This ordeal was to be bound hand and foot, weighted down with stones, and cast into the water. The priests had always assured us that those who spoke falsely or withheld information would sink and perish, but those who spoke the truth would miraculously float. I feared the water above all things, far above even death by stoning. Will you give us honest answers to our questions? Asked the high priest. No, I said again, my voice shaking. The high priest turned to the guards, probably to tell them to take me to the river, but I will never know for sure. There was a pounding on the heavy wooden door of the chamber, and a voice called from outside. Open for the Lord Sisera, great one, captain of the hosts of Canaan, defender of the city of Harosheth. That's it. All right, so that was quick, to the point. He had kind of a little trial there. They found him guilty because he will not tell. That's what made him guilty. I love that idea of, oh, we're going to tie you up and weight you down with stones thrown in the water. If you're telling the truth, you'll float. If you're lying, you're going to sink. You know what that means. That means they can say whoever they decide to kill and throw into the river or the water or the lake or wherever, that they'll sink. And then they can just say, see, we told you they'd sink because they didn't tell the truth. All right, but now it sounds like their plans are interrupted now that Sisera seems to be at the door. So we'll find out what happens when he enters tomorrow. Take care, guys. Have a great day. We'll see you tomorrow.